He was 29, unknown, and far too clever for the job they gave him. His name was Tommaso Benedetti, an orphan raised in the care of Benedictine monks near Perugia, fluent in Latin before age 12, devout but not naive. By 24, he'd earned a degree in ecclesiastical history from the Pontifical Gregorian University. By 27, he'd been quietly invited to the secret archives. And by 29, in the winter of 1960, he was assigned to Protocol Room C, a chamber that hadn't been opened since Pius XII died. That was where the envelope waited. It sat in a leather box, marked with a wax seal older than him, the kind used only on papal decrees and excommunications. The handwriting on the tag said, "To be opened by the Holy Father no later than 1960. He read it 3 times. Everyone knew the story. 3 shepherd children in Portugal, 1917. A lady brighter than the sun. 3 secrets, written down by the last surviving visionary, Sister Lucia dos Santos. The first 2 had already been made public. A vision of hell, the end of one war and the beginning of another, and a call to conversion that seemed to go ignored. The third, however, had been sealed, literally, locked in a box and delivered to Rome with one instruction: open it in 1960. By January, the rumors had spread from cardinals to janitors. Tommaso wasn't supposed to read it, but in the archives, curiosity is a sickness that rarely heals. On February 3rd, at 2:13 a.m., under the silence of marble saints and cold fluorescent lights, he did what he would never admit to anyone else. He broke the seal. It wasn't long. 1 page. Folded twice. He read it once, then again. Then, for the first time in his life, he wept not out of emotion, but dread. The letter didn't speak of Russia. It didn't mention war. It didn't name nations. It spoke of collapse, not from bombs, but from the inside. It described a great betrayal, beginning within the walls of the church. A slow, silent erosion. A time when those who wore white would speak like lambs, but think like wolves. A crisis not of faith among the laity, but among those tasked to defend the altar. It ended with a line underlined twice. The rot will begin at the top, and it will not end until the shepherd is struck down. Tommaso placed the page back in the envelope. He resealed it with wax from an old candle. His hands trembled the entire time. The next morning, the Pope, John the 23rd, was briefed. And nothing happened. No announcement, no homily, no publication. The Vatican simply said, "The secret does not pertain to our time." That was the phrase, the sentence that froze the hearts of every cleric who believed in prophecy. Not our time. Tommaso waited. For days, then weeks. No movement, no discussion. Until he was summoned. Not by a cardinal, not by the Holy Father, by Monsignor Vescovi, head of the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum. A thin man, skeletal even, who seemed to exist solely on ink and coffee. He wore gloves indoors, never smiled. He closed the door behind Tommaso and said nothing for 37 seconds. "You opened it!" he said finally. Tommaso tried to lie. He really did. But the words wouldn't come. "You're not the first," Vescovi said, voice flat. "You won't be the last. But you must forget it now." Tommaso stood in silence. "We do not control what heaven says," the Monsignor added, "but we control when it is heard." Tommaso wanted to argue, to scream, to ask, what right do we have to withhold something entrusted to the world? But then Vescovi said one last thing. There is a reason prophecy is veiled in riddle. Sometimes clarity is the greater mercy. Tommaso was dismissed. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, replaying every line of the letter in his mind. He saw the phrases burned into his thoughts: diabolical inversion, bishops in conflict, a pope walking through ruins. 3 weeks later, he tried to write it all down, from memory. But something strange happened. The more he wrote, the more the details blurred. Lines he remembered clearly began slipping. His memory, usually perfect, began fraying. He'd write a sentence, then forget the next one. Whole sections turned to fog. By April, he began to wonder if someone had tampered with his mind. A sedative in his coffee? A confession whispered too close? Or maybe the prophecy itself carried something heavier than truth, a weight that memory alone couldn't bear. Still, he tried again. This time, he didn't write. He spoke. In early May, he visited an old friend from seminary, a Jesuit priest stationed at a minor chapel outside Rome. They spoke in whispers, behind confession screens, long after Vespers. He told him everything. The priest believed him. "Then we must share it," he said. "No," Tommaso answered. "We have to protect it." It was the first time he realized what the letter had done to him. He no longer wanted it released, not because he doubted the content, but because he feared what it would unleash. What happens when the flock learns the shepherds are no longer safe? What happens when people stop trusting the altar? What happens when the church becomes suspect in its own house? The priest asked one question. Then why would heaven give a message it didn't want heard? Tommaso had no answer. By summer, the letter was moved. No longer stored in Protocol Room C, it was transferred to the private apartments of the Pope. And then came the second silence. Not just official, not procedural, a suffocating, almost supernatural quiet. 3 archivists died that year, one from illness, one from a fall, one, they say, by his own hand. Tommaso withdrew. He began missing morning mass. He left unanswered letters in his drawer. His notes grew erratic. He started seeing things in the archives, shadows where there were no candles, voices echoing before he entered the room. He visited the confessional nearly daily, not to repent, but to beg for strength. And then, in September 1960, he vanished. No resignation, no farewell. His room was found unlocked. His rosary still on the bed. His last entry in his journal read, "The secret is not the danger. The silence is." The Vatican never acknowledged his disappearance. They told his remaining family he had taken an indefinite leave of absence. His name was removed from all staff ledgers by 1961. But the memory didn't vanish. The Jesuit priest he had confided in kept a journal. In it, he wrote, "Tommaso saw something that changed him, but more frightening than what he saw was how the church reacted to it. Not with prayer, not with penance, but with suppression, as if heaven's warning was just another file to be misfiled." Decades later, that priest would speak with a Fatima scholar. The conversation was never published, but in a private letter, the scholar recorded one line. The third secret wasn't about war. It was about identity, about a time when the church would forget who she is. In 2000, when the Vatican finally released the so-called Third Secret, it contained none of that. No words, just a vision. A pope walking through a ruined city. Martyrs falling. Bullets, arrows, death. They said it was symbolic. They said it had been fulfilled in the assassination attempt on John Paul II. But others noticed something. No mention of internal betrayal. No words from the Virgin. No phrase like diabolical disorientation. No rot at the top. No wolves in white. Just images. As if the truth had been replaced with metaphor. Some said the real letter was still in a drawer. Others believed it had been destroyed. But a few, just a few, believed Tommaso had written it down before he vanished. And that it still exists. Somewhere. In the hands of someone waiting for the moment the silence finally breaks.